Oh, and he's just coming in. That's fine, no, stay. All right, welcome to the House Environment Committee. We are testimony on S223 in the bucket of, I think, the amendments, but we're going to hear about some thoughts on wetlands with Amanda Gustin. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. Good morning. A little bit delayed, but I'm glad to be here this morning. My name is Amanda Gustin. I'm a city councilor representing Ward 2 and Barrie City. Among my other hats, I also helped lead the flood response in 2023, in the summer of 2023. Response and recovery work to that. I was the founding chair of Barrie Up, which is Barrie City's long-term recovery group that still works to help people recover from the flooding, which unfortunately we had twice in 2023 and once again in 2024, just to speak most recently of it. I will preface my remarks by saying I'm not a scientist. I am a historian by training and profession. So that tends to be my view of things. Excuse me, I understand the committee is considering an amendment that would decrease wetlands buffers for class 2 wetlands in some areas, densely populated areas like Barrie City, which is one of the most densely populated municipalities in the state. We have 8,400 people and just a smidge under 4 square miles. We are tiny but mighty. I also understand that the housing development that we are working on in Barrie City called Prospect Heights has been a frequent topic in consideration of this amendment and of the wetlands rules generally. So with that in mind, I want to start by saying that I am wholeheartedly in support of the development at Prospect Heights. It's an important project for Barrie City, which, as you may know, and as we are unfortunately keenly aware, was by far the most impacted municipality in Vermont after the flooding in terms of structural damage and in terms of housing loss. And that in Barrie City, we have been thinking of flood resiliency as a wide variety of things. And one of those things is new housing that is safe and affordable for people displaced from the flooding and for people who want to come live to Barrie City. And Prospect Heights is at elevation out of our floodway. And so we think about both flexibility in our housing stock in addition to safety of our housing stock in flood resiliency. One of my projects on City Council has been to work on, to author, and to follow up on our citywide flood resiliency plan, which provides for a wide variety of things that will move us forward as a municipality. So when it is completed, Prospect Heights will be a net gain to a city that I love very much, badly needed. However, I do need to temper that support by sharing my deep reservations about the idea of reducing wetlands buffers. As I said, I'm not a scientist, but I have spent absolutely as much time as humanly possible listening to scientists specifically on the idea of what will make a more flood resilient place over the last few years, as well as listening to residents in Barrie City. Wetlands are crucial to flood resiliency. They provide storage space for water. I hope you've all been to Barrie City. It's not too far away, but if you have not, you can picture it like a bowl. Main Street runs right down the center of the bowl, and our hillsides are the sides of that bowl. And quite a lot of our flooding is flash flooding rather than the inundation flooding that Montpelier saw. We both flooded very badly. We flooded very differently. Wetlands in particular are crucial to stormwater runoff, which is a huge problem in Barrie City. We need to hold and slow water everywhere that we can. So as I said, I'm an historian. I know that flooding is the disaster of Vermont's past, present, and future. People sometimes ask me, are you worried about if Barrie City is going to flood again? And my answer is unequivocally no. I am not in the slightest bit worried because I know that we will flood again without question, without hesitation, and that our job is to prepare for that and to become more resilient in anticipation of that. I've been working so hard on this exactly the last few years because of that certainty. And it is because of that certainty that I know we need to do everything we can to make sure that Barrie does not, or at least to mitigate the impacts of future flooding events in Barrie City. Flood resiliency can and should be both new development and new housing and protecting our existing wetlands buffers and important environmental considerations. We do need to make some trade-offs and we do need to have some give and take in these things, but I don't believe that this one is the right one for Barrie City. happy to take any questions.
Thank you for your testimony. Do members have questions? Representative Nor.
Thank you so much for coming and sharing your testimony. Appreciate your desire to help out folks in the Berry City. So how many people lost their homes in the floods that have passed?
That is a very tough number to give you precisely. So I'll talk about it in a couple of ways of thinking about it. In terms of homes that are totally gone or will be soon totally gone through buyouts or complete destruction, we're looking at in the 30s. In terms of people who were displaced by the flooding and never returned, and because 60% of Berry City's housing is rental property and many of those are multifamily, a single property impacted is considerably more people. So we don't have good numbers, frankly, even after years of working, but we are in the hundreds probably of people who were displaced. Some of them may have returned considerably later. Quite a few of them will never return to Berry City, whether through trauma, whether through lack of opportunity, or things like that. There are many more people who wish that their housing could be more flood safe. We denied quite a number of buyouts for a wide variety of reasons. But there are people who hoped for buyouts that we were unable to accommodate. And also there are folks who simply don't feel safe in their housing anymore, but are still there because they don't have other options. Usually the number given is around a 75, I believe, net loss in housing units because of the flooding. And that's again with the multifamily considerations. But that displacement that I may have slept on my family member's couch for 2 years while my house was getting ready. I may be living in a house that's about to be bought out and is in disrepair, but I can't go anywhere just yet until I get the money from the buyout. Those are more nebulous numbers.
Well, to follow on this new development that you're looking at in Berry City, can you remind me of the name of it? Sorry.
So it's usually described as Prospect Heights.
Prospect Heights. How many units are there?
So to my understanding, we do not have a firm number on that yet. I have heard a variety of numbers, in part because we are still working on the sort of due diligence plotting and planning. I've heard numbers anywhere from 75 to 120, but truly we're still waiting on a lot of the sort of thinking and planning and good due diligence on that to get it.
Some of that range variation depend on how the wetlands are delineated?
Some of it does, yes. Some of it does also depend on how, as I understand it, it was originally laid out some 30 years ago. So some of that also depends on how the relaying out goes. But some of it does depend on that wetlands boundary.
It
Yes.
sounds like if we're on the higher end of that, we could essentially cover all of the housing that was lost. Right.
So
Or maybe not.
I don't, my understanding of the numbers, no, it will not completely
Put a good sized dent.
cover. It will, but we're also a growing city. We are on average a younger city than many municipalities in Vermont. Like everywhere, we need more housing everywhere. We've done a lot of really good, really cool projects in other parts of the city to add housing as well. So we need housing everywhere. I guess my contention, as I said earlier, is that and we don't know the exact numbers yet, but a certain number of gain in housing at Prospect Heights in exchange for flood protection, as I described it on the edge of that bowl that is Berry City, does not feel like a safe trade-off to me.
Yeah, the Prospect Heights units are in a
Yes.
resilient or
Yes.
safe location. Yes.
Yep.
Thank you, Brent.
Yep.
I'm wondering about the buyouts and are they completed? And so we're 2 or 3 years out from the
Yeah.
flooding, and has FEMA been a partner available, and are people who are eligible, are those finished?
They are not finished yet. So they are being taken in close to order of application. So our first buyouts that completed were our landslides. We lost 4 properties to landslides. You may have seen the news, houses that were completely moved off their foundations. The next phase were the flooded properties in 23, and we are still working on flooded properties from 2024. There was, it's not, as best I can see and follow, it's not a clear, there's no clear timeline for those. They stop and start. But they are not yet completed. I believe we are nearing the end of the list.
Representative Austin,
Yeah.
we've to
Just quickly, do you know about the home insurance policies or premiums on people who are they losing flood insurance? Is it costing more, or are they not renewing flood insurance?
All of the above. So the National Flood Insurance Program, which municipalities are required to buy into, if they meet certain floods, which Berry City certainly does. And some of the zoning and planning work that we do is in order to stay in compliance with that. And if you live within certain designated map areas, you're required to buy into that flood insurance program if you have a mortgage. So I can speak to residents in my experience who fit all of those possibilities. They may no longer have a mortgage because they're retired and long paid off and they chose to stop paying their flood insurance. I can speak to residents for whom flood insurance premiums have gone up considerably and it's become a financial burden. And it is, in their experience, does not make them whole in the ways that they would hope. So it is a backstop, best, but not always a good one.
Representative Tagliavia, and then we're going to move on.
You talked about flash flooding. Can you give us any information about infrastructure upgrades or maintenance that has been done since the floods to try to help mitigate some of those problems?
Absolutely.
I've heard a number of stories about long neglected infrastructure that possibly could have helped to contribute to some of the flooding issues. I'm curious what the city of Barry is undertaken to try to deal with that.
Absolutely. We have done some. I think I will preface this by saying that in a storm event of the magnitude that we received in 2023, there was no amount of anything that could have stopped us from flooding. It could have helped. Absolutely. Infrastructure and improved and increased, and often people use the word hardened infrastructure could have helped. We're looking at that in a couple of different ways. We have a couple of bridges that we have been advised to either eliminate or raise, and we have been assiduously pursuing funding for that. We have not yet been successful. One of our bridges, I think, is at attempt number 5 right now, and that is the bridge that leads to our water treatment plant. It's the only way to get there. So we are trying very hard to both replace that bridge to make it higher and also to lower a buyout property next to it to create a floodplain so that the water can flow more easily. We recently received money through the Community Development Block Grant Disaster Response Funding Round that ACCD administered to do a survey of our stormwater system and to scope out and plan, especially culverts that could and should be larger. We are thinking about floodplain on either side of our rivers. Berry City has a long history of industrial building. We're the Granite City. And over the years, we have lined most of our downtown rivers and streams with big granite blocks. We've channeled them, is what we described as. And so we are working to find places where we can expand that channel, increase access to floodplain, which also does become an infrastructure question. And we're actually about to kick off a citywide citizen-led adopt a storm drain program so that citizens can adopt a drain in their neighborhood, clean it out regularly, report damage to that drain directly to city DPW officials. So we're looking at small all the way up to large scale. In terms of what we have actually managed to do yet, not much, I'll be very honest with you. We've repaved some places, we have cleaned out some things, but we have not yet received really big funding to do the really big projects that we know we need to do.
Welcome. Thanks for your testimony.
Thank you.
Next, we'll go to Elijah Schumacher.
I'm just getting my screen sharing going here.
I apologize in advance. I have an 11 o'clock meeting.
Okay. I won't be too hurt when you leave them. My name is Elijah Schumacher. I grew up in Cabot, Vermont. Left to pursue an education, and I came back to Vermont because I really love this state. This is where I want to be. I have been a farmer, a construction worker, I've been a waiter. Most recently, I've been working in the natural resources field, particularly water resources and wetlands. I spent about the last 4 years working for the Vermont Wetlands Program as a regulator, working in bioassessment and mapping. So I have a range of experience with the mapping questions surrounding this topic, and also being out in the field, going into those wetlands and being able to ground truth mapping. I'm going to speak to that a little bit later on, but I want to start off by talking about seepage wetlands. This behind me is a hemlock balsam fir black ash seepage swamp, one of 3 different seepage wetland natural communities we have in the state, along with northern hardwood seepage forests and sloping cedar seepage forests. These wetland communities are difficult to map, but very important in a number of ways. They are often sloping, they're forested, so they don't look like an open marsh. It's an easy kind of wetland for people to identify. These are a little bit trickier to pick out, especially from a desktop review. They are often defined by hummocks and hollows, so they have components of upland natural communities involved as well. They're often mosaic types, so they do have some uplands and some wetlands. And that percentage really defines whether something is upland mosaic or actually qualifies as a wetland. These have groundwater seeping up from the ground, arriving at the surface, and they can run quite a range in terms of hydrology. So they can look quite wet, they can have water on the surface, they can serve as vernal pools. On my left side, you can also see something that looks pretty dry, and you maybe could think of as an upland forest, but this would most certainly key out to be wetland. It has organic soils, wetland vegetation, and indicators of wetland hydrology. So seepage forests, when disturbed, can channelize. They're often headwaters to our small order streams. And when disturbed, they can channelize. They can move that water with more velocity into waterways than it normally would. And this can lead to flooding, particularly some of the flash flooding that was mentioned earlier. There are a lot of other reasons why you don't want to build in a wetland, which the current amendment would allow in some cases. So I want to talk about flooding has been a topic frequently. I want to move on from flooding into some of the other human impact issues going on here. So why am I talking about seepage? It's because I grew up in a seepage wetland. My parents were house hunting in 1997. They had 2 small children, another one on the way, plans to have more, single earner household. They were fairly ignorant about environmental matters or regulatory matters. Not stupid or malicious, but uninformed. They're very average Vermonters. So they bought one of the houses that was available on the market to them. It was a reasonable price, something they could get into. They were excited to move there. Shortly after signing, after closing, the problem started cropping up. The person who built this house built it on a spring. She was warned not to, but she's pretty headstrong, so there's nothing really preventing her from doing that, so she went for it. This led to persistent water issues in our basement. We had frogs in our basement when I was growing up. That was fun for a kid. My parents weren't a fan, but this caused some pretty significant problems to the foundation. We had cracking, we had mold, My parents spent thousands of dollars to remediate some of these water issues, putting in a sump pump, curtain drains, sealing the walls. That worked for a little while. Given when they bought this house, it was 20 years old. It's not an old house. It shouldn't be falling apart. But as we lived there, it continued to deteriorate. By the time my parents were prepared to sell this place, we had one wall. This was not a structural wall directly under the house, but there is an attached porch. This is a basement wall. There's an attachment to the basement underneath that porch. So load bearing and structural to a degree. And this is what it looked like. By the time they were moving to sell, you can see the frost heaving from that high water table. It caused substantial cracking. There had been some efforts to remediate that. You can see those dark patches where old cracks had been sealed to prevent water coming in. That happened in the early 2000s. By the time they're ready to sell, all of that had gotten much worse. My family has connections. I mentioned that I worked in construction. I have many family members who did. We were able to do work ourselves to shore this up. But this would have been, an expensive problem. It was an expensive problem for my family. It would have been a more expensive problem for many other people. The basement is not the extent of the problems here. We also had a wall on our garage that rotted away. The garage had to be jacked up and that wall replaced. The septic system also failed shortly after we moved into the house, and there was this very long period where my family was unable to afford a replacement septic system. I don't know if anybody's taken that on recently or heard about how much that costs, but it is very expensive, especially for a single earner household. So there were years of pumping septic and discharges due to, to the environment due to this failed system. By the time my family was ready to sell this and move, there is a hugely expensive mound system that got put in as a best fit. It's not a spot that anybody would actually really want to put a septic system, but it was the only place on the property to stick up the front yard, more or less entirely. And it was incredibly expensive. I was talking to my dad about this a few nights ago, and he was utterly relieved that somebody was interested in buying this house, which by the time they sold it was a 40-year-old house. That's not very old. So my point here is that there are very real, tangible, financial, and stressful impacts to humans to building in these wetland ecosystems. It is not a good place to build. And the current amendment will allow building in some wetlands because it is limited only to those that are mapped. I know people have talked to you all a lot about wetland mapping, so I'm not going to go too deep into it, but I've been pretty involved in this process. And it's always sort of shocking to me to look at this mapping and think about the resolution that the people who did this work, contractors from St. Mary's University of Minnesota, they're doing this at a resolution of 1 to 12,000 meters. That's what this looks like. It's hard to pick out wetlands from that range. Sometimes they may go down to 1 to 8,000 meters. It's a little bit easier. Still tough. This is when I'm doing a desktop review, when I'm mapping wetlands. I'm looking at this resolution, but this isn't the resolution that I'm actually drawing shapes and mapping from. When I'm mapping, I'm looking at something more like this, 1 to 2,000 meters. It may be sort of hard to pick out the wetlands here if you are not trained in that work and used to doing it. The green is what was mapped by the new mapping work that was done recently. So to be clear, this is an improvement and update from what is still existing and what will still be tied to regulations in the Memphremagog and Vattenkill watersheds and the Lamoille. So the green is what St. Mary's mapped. The red is where I would be seeing wetland from a desktop mapping exercise. And we do have a delineation, or the wetlands program rather does have a delineation on file that reflects something much closer to this red line. So The mapping is improving. The mapping is not adequate to regulate to. 25 feet from that green shape is still in the wetland. You're not getting out of the wetland there. I think that that does it for my testimony, and I'm happy to take any questions, clarify anything.
Thank you for that. Unfortunately, Sarita had to leave and she does keep bringing up exactly what your family experienced. And the ramifications of that. Sure to have her look back through your testimony. Do members have questions? Representative North.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Eli, for coming in. So when was the parents' house built? What?
Late 70s.
So that was after Act 250 was put in place, but was it
That predates the wetland rules.
predates the wetland rules? Yeah, so could today, given today's current rules, somebody desire, if somebody did desire to build a house in a seepage wetland area, would they be able to get a soil-based septic system permit? Because every house has to have a septic and water. I mean,
No, I mean, not in the wetland.
Yeah.
Maybe in an upland area
so, I mean,
beside the wetland,
so
they may.
so the reality of somebody actually building a house in a wetland is you wouldn't be able to get your water, wastewater, stormwater permits, that you, regardless of Act 250 jurisdiction.
In a situation like this, if somebody is very interested in building a house there, if they have some area, some upland area, they can site their wastewater system in the upland area and site their house in the wetland, if that wetland has been deregulated as this amendment proposes. That area is not mapped. It's still not mapped. Same areas did not pick it up in their mapping exercise.
And to be clear, the amendment would be applying to places like Barry that have water and sewer. The house could be built in a seepage wetland, former mapped or not, but connect to water and sewer in the town.
And this is the A&R amendment we're talking about?
Yes,
So that's 223?
keeps coming up, so, yeah. Oh, now. Representative Chapin.
Thank you for your testimony that ranges from your own really very clear personal experience to, professional experience in wetlands. I am curious about sort of the distinction. I'm just thinking about not only the wetlands deregulation that we've been discussing but also on the Act 250 side, the conversations we've been having about natural resource communities that are pretty critical but aren't really well protected in Vermont. And we're, changing Act 181 right now and working on that in our committee. And one of those critical natural resource areas are the headwaters. And as you talked about seepage wetlands, and you spoke a little bit about the relationship to headwaters, and I guess I'm just curious if you have anything to share about the potential. So while now we have wetlands regulations at the moment that we haven't yet rolled those protections back, but I'm wondering about how easy it is to end up potentially, again, without really clear knowledge, end up building in what looks like a dry area one time of the year, but could be that kind of seepage or headwater area. We just haven't had a lot of examples of sort of headwaters and how that relates to wetlands and how it relates to the potential to end up building in that kind of an environment.
Sure. So if you have a system where the wetlands program staff, wetland ecologists are visiting sites to assess them for wetlands because there's some indication that there may be a wetland there, we would capture that. And in the spot that I grew up in, there's a mapped wetland now, a newly mapped wetland close by. So the wetland ecologist would be like, there's wetland close by, you've got some signatures that there may be more wetland out there, we'll look at it. And then they would observe based off of their expertise in looking at hydrophytic plants, soil, and indicators of wetland hydrology, either on the ground or in the ground, that's an area that should be protected. I mentioned that these run a pretty wide range. From some of the ones that I showed were really wet. They had standing water. Some of them are pretty dry and could easily be mistaken without looking a little bit deeper for a buildable upland area. I'm not sure if I'm really answering your question here, but
I mean, just what I'm hearing is there's things that might be related to headwaters that might actually not exactly be a wetland, that there's just some gray area in there and without, and the last thing I just heard you say is really without the expertise on the ground, which right now is our A&R staff that work in the Wetlands Division. We've also been discussing the potential for certifying non-state ecologists who do wetlands delineation. So I don't know if you have a comment on this potential for a certification program that then would mean A&R staff aren't always double checking the wetlands delineations that come in from the private sector. Anyway, now I'm moving to another topic, but
yeah, I don't think that I have spent enough time contemplating the repercussions of a certification program. I know that New Hampshire has one by some accounts that works well, by others there are some problems. I don't think that I'm able to provide a comment on a certification program.
thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Great, we have Lorraine joining us from Zoom.
Hi, good morning. I'm sorry about my video. I wish I was more tech proficient. And we did have a recent upgrade. I'm on my work computer to 11, so I'm sorry that I can't figure it out. I'm hoping that that the letter that I sent yesterday, that perhaps some of those images could be shared. I live in Essex. And thank you all for having me, by the way. I appreciate your time. This is difficult work that you're doing, so I much appreciate your work. We are on Sewer Core. In Sewer Core, we are in an area that was recently targeted for Tier 1B passage. Essex Select Board decided against it for now. And I think part of the reason is because of the lack of oversight and be able to hold really things to account. I think COVID wreaked havoc with our system, with A&R. I feel really bad for A&R in terms of what's happened. But if you could put up that picture of my my backyard 10 years ago and my backyard now, I think that would be helpful as well. We had
Hold on one-
sorry.
If you
Yeah.
just talk for 1 minute.
Lorraine, I'm not able to share the images. I emailed you how to share your screen if you could, but if not, the images are online and they have the same naming convention you gave with 1B and 2. So you could reference that.
Great. It's I think the only split screen one that I included, and it's a grassy backyard with our wedding party 10 years ago. And then it's also what it looks like now. I took the other pictures taken a couple weeks back with my friend canoeing in the backyard. And what's happened is, first of all, I am not a NIMBY. We want housing. So I just want to put that out there. I'm certainly in support of building. And we like the build that happened next door, which added a ton of impervious surface to this with the roof line, along with a solar canopy that was put in. And unfortunately, because of the lack of oversight systems, a few things happened that impacted our backyard and has made it wet in our view. The first thing that happened was there was a massive clear cutting. There's a map that shows the hydric soil map, and then it's above that, it's also showing what it looked like before it was clear cut. There are two swatches of trees. There's one swatch that is hard to see because they were deciduous and it was taken in the fall, I believe. So you can't really tell, but there's a lot of deciduous trees. We believe those were in Class 2 wetlands from a previous road build in 2007, which did show there were Class 2 wetlands. And then there were pines that were closer to the new apartment build that were clear cut as well. We believe that the trees that were cut were between 100 and 200 trees, all mature. And I'm not sure if people are aware, but when I did the research on it, the pine trees, the white pines on average, there's science out there that you can easily Google and look up. They're well vetted, that you can see per tree species an average of amount of water that the trees drink. And for the white pines, per 1 inch of diameter, it was about 10 gallons a week that they pull up. So when I did the math, it's thousands and thousands of gallons of water that now run through our land and through the neighboring land. So the first thing that happened, I'm sorry.
Can you, like, I think we can all look at your written testimony, but if you would
Yeah.
just orient us to your map on the page 3 map, maybe which parcel is yours and the new apartment you're talking about?
So our
Um,
parcel is the parcel on the right. And
Parcel on
their
the-
parcel is the parcel on the left, which has, they've added 16 new apartments there, and they're going to add 8 more to the top floor, to the 3rd floor. So it's a massive new roof line, as well as the solar canopy that was added, which is great. I love that they added solar canopy, but that also added impervious surface. And previously in the 2007, they had built a road through it, which they built through class 2 wetlands. We could not find a conditional use determination that was required. So again, that goes back to oversight. I think that it potentially could have been mitigated if there were culverts, maybe if they got the permit and put culverts through to allow the water to run through, because by law, you're not supposed to put anything beyond, 3 feet across a wetland. So there are certainly ways to mitigate. And by the way, I'm in plumbing, just to let you know. I work in wholesale plumbing, so I do have familiarity with some new engineering. And also just thinking, maybe some of this we're thinking about in the wrong way. For now, to me, I'm really worried that we will try to push for even less of a buffer, because even the buffers that are in play now and in our local zoning regs, those don't do anything really, because it's only as good as the local oversight and as good as A&R can task, and if our zoning administrators are holding them to task. We've been at this since 2018, I would say 2019, and we got, not only did we get no relief, we now can't really build in our backyard. And our backyard was prime territory for Tier 1B. It is in the center of town. It's in the densest part of town. It's part of the town that's most connected. And so because of the process and the lack of oversight, we can't really even build in the backyard. And we're in the high density residential area. So what we have experienced is that because of lack of oversight, and I know this from people directly telling me, the trees that are getting cut in the wetlands in class 2, class 3, and potentially class 1, I'm not sure, but I know class 2 and class 3. And so trees are being cut right and left. You can see it along Route 15. You could probably even do some Google mapping to show the tree loss that we've experienced in the last 20 years. And the people are just filling it in because no one's watching. And as they continue to fill in the wetlands, my water table is rising. And now we're getting a $300 a month water bill because we have to pump out the water, not only the outside, but we have another pump running on the inside in our basement. So now that the cost is being pushed onto the private landowner without any relief or ability to relieve, and it's even difficult to prove what we know is happening. My husband grew up here in this house. So we have a long history. We're in our 60s. So we have a long history in this house of knowing when, the springs would come. We have vernal wetlands on that are now massively expanded. And now it's a year-round endeavor to pump the water out until it freezes. When it freezes, we get reprieve. And once the thaw happens, we're dealing with a crap load of water. Also next door, it's clear that where they built on the original apartment, they added on. They've been some pumping for a long time too. So they have water in the basement as well. And they have tenants. And how are the tenants protected if there's mold in the basement? No idea. I know they don't let people in the basement next door. So there's all these kind of ripple effects in terms of what we're trying to do for climate resilience. In terms of energy, that increases energy use as well, because now you're adding more pumps. Pumps are very energy intensive. So to me, I know there's a balance somewhere, but the other thing I was thinking about was because where Essex is situated, and you can see there was hydric soils in that pink swatch, that's all hydric soil. is not necessarily related to the headwaters. It's also related to the fact of the soil and the quality to it, because it holds the water. This, because we're now starting to experience the extremes, we're experiencing more drought and more flooding and intense flooding. That could help us in times of drought. If we figure out how to, engineering wise, there's probably places we could look to that maybe we could water collect and help keep some of that water, that storm water, from going into the ground, and collect it for times of people who are on wells, that they can come fill their water up. I just think some of these are engineering kind of problems that we could look toward other expertise. But really for us, and a lot of the work that we've been doing locally with a nonprofit group, is that it's the lack of oversight. That we're not even gonna, there was no delineation even required for next door, because where they were building wasn't close to that wetland, I guess. But really, to me, any parcel that has wetland on should require delineation for their new build. We should not allow basements in a certain distance near wetland builds as well. I mean, I think there's a lot of kind of balanced mitigation that we could do if we want to move ahead. Also, to me, and certainly Barry would know this, the previous testimony, and water, and Montpelier knows this. For me, being in the plumbing sector, HVAC, to me, all of the HVAC stuff, utility rooms, need to be out of basements. We shouldn't have utilities in basements near certain areas. And the largest thing to me is really the lack of technology in Vermont, that we're so woefully behind in mapping this and having the siloed committees that don't interact, because it's really one long equation with a number of variables in terms of the ripple effect and domino effect impacts. So if you have any, I don't have a lot to add other than my letter and their personal experience, but we're pretty bummed out. I mean, this is going to cost us another $30,000 to try to figure out how we can. Now that the water table rose, the Army Corps of Engineer, by the way, came out and did some work next door. We stumbled across it online, and it looks like they delineated in the summer. There was a report from them in October 2025 that they acknowledged that there was land disturbance, but there was nothing that could happen from the hundreds of trees that were cut down that were working very well to take care of the wetlands and allow people to build. So I don't know how you incorporate that kind of thing in terms of the variables for helping the wetlands.
All right, thanks so much for your testimony.
You're welcome. If you have any questions, let me know.
Yep, do members have questions? I'm not seeing any, but I really do appreciate that you brought this to our attention and your perspective on it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
All right, under the same topic, we have one more witness, Dory Barton.
Good morning. Thank you for having me today. I do have a prepared statement for you to keep it concise, so I'll read from that and then can take questions if you have any when we're done. So my name is Dory Barton. I work with, I'm a consulting wetland ecologist, a founding partner of Arrowwood Environmental. We're a Vermont-based ecological consulting firm, and we're entering into our 25th year of business in Vermont. My specialty is wetland delineation and permitting. Over the course of my career, I've been appointed to working groups that were established to review and provide input, proposed changes to the Vermont wetland rules. State did not convene such a group for the current proposed changes and the proposed amendment. So I am appreciative of being invited here today to offer testimony and comment on the proposed amendment, which will have direct bearing on the Vermont wetland rules. For some background, I work with a wide range of clients on a variety of projects. Residential development of all sizes is a common project type that I work on. My role is typically to help my clients work through local, state, and federal wetland regulations that can be triggered by their projects. Some projects may only require time on the phone. More complicated projects result in field assessment and follow-up permitting. It's my job as a consultant to help my clients realize their project goals and make sure the project does not run afoul of regulations. State wetland rules are just one of many regulations that need to be considered, and adhered to by my clients as they plan their projects. There are two aspects of the state's proposed amendment that I'd like to address today. Those are wetland mapping and then the requirement for wetland certification for consultants. I'll start with the wetland mapping. Until this amendment proposal for just residential housing, I would say the foundation of wetland regulations for the last 35 years in the state of Vermont has been the accurate identification, delineation of wetlands using a science-based protocol developed by the Army Corps of Engineers. The state proposes to remove the requirement for scientifically accurate boundary delineation, place it with reliance on the Vermont Significant Wetland Inventory maps, which I'll be referring to as VSWI. This map data set was generated from remote desktop mapping. It was only intended to show approximate locations and not be used for legal boundaries. Just share my own process as a professional in this field, and that I look to the VSWI maps before all of my site visits. It alerts me to the likelihood of wetlands before I go out. It's a tool. It's not the end product. My almost 30 years of doing this work, I can tell you that the maps have never provided delineation level accuracy for wetland boundaries. The data generated from this remote mapping results in wetlands not being mapped and uplands being mapped as wetland. The new statewide maps, as Elijah said earlier, are an improvement. The technology and aerial imagery used to generate the data is better, but is not good enough to base regulatory decisions. I'd like to share with you, we can do this on the first image, which I labeled as image 1. Let me just see if I can share screen here. This 1B. Okay, can you see that?
Yes. You could zoom in a little, that would help.
Okay.
If
Unfortunately,
not, we can.
okay,
can
I'm not
put
sure I know how to zoom in. Sorry about that. Yeah, I guess not
We
sure.
all have access.
Okay, I am getting some technical help here. Yeah, they would like me to zoom in on. Is that better?
Yes.
Control and scroll. Okay, so I kept this simple for you. This image shows the new VSWI mapping in green. And then it shows, that's the darker green. So it's locating wetlands. And then what I did is I brought in an actual field delineation that I conducted using the Army Corps science-based manuals. So VSWI, as I said, tool indicating their wetlands there. But then when you actually go boots on the ground, accurately delineating boundaries, it's very different. This example shows you a lot of under mapping, but there are areas of over mapping that could be relevant in terms of, a landowner and what they want to do. But the point here is that if you use the VSWI, you really do not have a good sense of where your wetlands are. And that's the proposed change, is to rely upon this mapping data set. Okay, now I'm going to try and Erin, can you help me again? Try and get the image 2 at this point, which is 1B. Yep, can you zoom in for me? I apologize. I had hoped to be there today, but it was just too short notice. Okay, so another image for you. Further, is this correctly showing? Are you seeing a second image now?
Not yet, but there's sometimes a delay, but which one, we have it also, we can access it through your.
1B?
Okay, 1B.
Okay, I don't know why it's not showing, but we can just go with it if you have it in front of you. So
Yeah.
in image 1B, you'll see the new VSWI again in the blue, or the green, and then you'll see my field delineation in the light blue. I think, in this scenario, again, we have a significant area of under mapping, which under the proposed amendment could potentially result in significant area of wetland development. Putting a 25-foot buffer on the green line is going to obviously not, leave a lot of wetland area potentially available for development. And I will just offer that my understanding of the wastewater rules is that there is not a prohibition of designing and installing in wetlands. It's based on your water table, and so that you may not be able to design and install an in-ground system, but you would potentially be able to design what we all refer to as a mound, and essentially fill the wetland, and build on top of it. Arrowwood is uniquely familiar with the inaccuracies of the desktop remote wetland mapping at a broad landscape scale. We've conducted townwide mapping of wetlands for more than 20 towns in the state of Vermont, and we're currently mapping all the wetlands in the town of Waterbury. We're able to spend more time mapping on the townwide scale, but it's still primarily a desktop analysis, as Elijah was talking to you about. We also use available technology and aerial imagery. Our town mapping, just like the BSWI, is not intended to portray delineation level accuracy of wetland boundaries that I would put forward as needed for regulatory decision making. So if you go to image 2, okay, how do I reshare? Oh, and then I
Go to your screen. So that'll change your image now.
okay with this one.
Go to this. Click on it.
Yeah,
Share.
that's not the right one.
You gotta move it. Go ahead. No, flip the next one there.
Okay, thank you. All right, so this is image 2. So what this example is showing you is the underlying VSWI, which is the dark green. And then the lighter green is actually the Arrowwood mapping. So this is in the town of Waterbury. And then the gray area is Arrowwood. That's delineation that I did, but did not provide to my staff person who was doing the remote review. So again, you can see VSWI gives you a good idea there's a wetland there. It's a great tool. Townwide mapping, we're able to spend more time with it, zoom in like Elijah was saying, but it's still a desktop review. On the ground delineation is where you actually know where your wetland is and where you want to focus your development. State proposal to rely upon the VSWI remote mapping for residential projects in particular areas, the designated areas, in my opinion, is going to result in chaos in the current wetland regulatory arena and serious inequities amongst Vermont landowners. It's important to factor into consideration when you consider this amendment that there are federal regulations in place that actually require formal science-based wetland delineations, regardless of location or project type. The Army Corps of Engineers continues to require boots on the ground wetland delineation based on their protocols for regulatory decisions. And the Army Corps just put into place more restrictive regulations in April of this year. For the Army Corps, residential projects with any wetland impact are now going to be required to go through a formal permit process, which will require a formal wetland delineation using the protocols, not using the VSWI maps. And I'll refer you to the Army Corps Nationwide Permit 29 if you're interested in the details of that. So while our state may allow residential development in wetlands that do not appear on the VSWI or are mapped incorrectly with this proposed amendment, the Army Corps of Engineers does not and will not. The contradictory procedures created by the amendment will certainly lead to violations of federal wetland rules and ensuing expense for landowners and developers to correct these wetland violations. It's my opinion that the proposed amendment is flawed because it's not based on science, result in direct harm to Vermont's landowners and to Vermont's wetlands. I support the current process of using accepted scientific protocols to accurately identify the boundaries of wetlands for regulatory purposes in the state of Vermont. Next, I just want to briefly address the Wetland Consultant Certification Program and Consultant Work Self-Certification Proposal that's also in the amendment. So I'll share, when I started my career, I was required to submit 3 wetland delineations for review and approval to the Wetlands Program. District wetland ecologists came out to each of the delineation sites, reviewed my work, evaluated my proficiency with the rules, and then ultimately approved the delineations. I got added to the state list, been on the list ever since. Formal certification program could be beneficial. And it is done in surrounding states, like Elijah commented. It's a huge lift, I think, and it's going to require considerable time and resources to develop. It's been casually discussed on many working groups that I've been part of, that it wasn't necessarily the priority. And certainly the wetlands program staff has discussed it for years. I recommend convening a specific working group of stakeholders, including consultants, to flesh out this idea, put together a proposed framework for how it could be implemented and actually implemented by whom. And going further, the amendment outlines that after we establish such a certification program, that consultants will self-certify their own work. And I believe this is in response to perception that there's a delay in permit processing because of the current procedure with the wetland staff having to approve delineations. As a business owner and a professional wetland delineator, I prefer the system that's placed now. I think it's better for consultants and for their clients. It's predictable, consistent. I delineate the boundaries per the protocols. I schedule this district of wetland ecologists to review the delineation, and I receive written confirmation of the delineation approval. The state accepts the delineation, and there's no further liability for me, the consultant, or the landowner. Delineation boundary is approved for a period of 5 years. You know your boundary, and it's firm for 5 years. I do not support the proposed change to consultant self-certification as put forth in the amendment. If there's a staffing problem with the Vermont Wetlands Program, I support additional resources being directed toward that program. And with that, I'll thank you for your time. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to try to address them.
Thank you so much for your testimony. You mentioned that when you were getting into the business, you had to do 3 delineations that were reviewed by staff, and then you got on the approved list of wetlands consultants. Has that procedure changed, or is that still what happens for folks to get onto the list?
I have a relatively new employee who just went through the same process, so I can only speak to what we do, but I believe that is still the process.
Okay, so your new employee did the same thing.
He did.
Okay, great. And I actually didn't catch the self-certification in that amendment. Did others? I remember seeing that in there, but.
What does that term even mean?
Well, I think it means you would approve yourself. Is that what you mean?
To be a
Lori?
certified engineer, you just approve yourself?
It's sort of like
My-
engineers.
Go ahead.
So it's my understanding that the desire is to have a certification, a formal certification program that consultants have to participate in. And so you receive the Vermont certification if you go through that program. And if you're Vermont, if you have that certification, there's a suggestion that your delineations will no longer have to be approved. And then it's assumed that they're accurate. And so it's putting the liability of the accuracy of the delineation onto the consultant, as opposed to the current process, which is that we have the state staff come out and review delineations, and it's only with their blessing or approval that it's deemed, accurate. So
Yeah.
I believe it's flipping it.
Got it. Yes, thank you for drawing that to our attention. Representative Chapin.
Yeah, and I think that conceptually, this mirrors what the engineer does with a wastewater design or something like that. But again, we've been discussing this, and I've been one to raise. I have the feeling there's a lot more nuance in here that we would need to spend a lot more time thinking about. And I appreciate your testimony and your recommendation, which is in line with what I was thinking, which is we should ask folks to flesh this out and look at the pros and cons, not just presume the certification is the answer to the timeline challenges for projects. So yeah, thanks for your testimony.
Yeah, and can you tell us about your experience with the timeline? So when you submit a delineation But how long does it typically take for you to get out in the field with an A&R employee?
It varies. There are different regions in the state with different coordinators, or district ecologists. And there's different level of activity, I think, for each of them in their own districts. And so we work across the state. I think that my strategy is to make my request early. And sometimes I'll make my request even before I do the delineation, so that I get on their calendar. So I work with the system, and I get my clients what they need in a timely manner. I think that folks have a really hard time understanding why you can't request a site visit with the wetlands program a week before our season ends, and they're not understanding of the fact that there's a lot going on then. So I think that as the consultant, it's our job to understand the system and to plan ahead. Our clients don't necessarily understand, and they look to us to help them get what they need in a timely manner. So I personally have not had a problem with it, but I know the system and I know how to work within it.
All right, thank you. Thanks for your testimony. Thank you again. All right, we're gonna shift gears and welcome the climatologist. Please join us. I think I'm right there. Okay.
I can't see behind my head, so just let me know if everything looks okay.
Good, it's not quite in presentation mode yet, but it's getting there. There you go.
Yeah,
Okay.
I did send you a note that we had a fire drill and we had to evacuate, so that's why we're running behind.
No, I figured that out the hard way because I went through all three entrances. Back to this one in here, so all good. Got my excellent steps in. Well, good afternoon, good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. My name is Leslie Ann Dupini-Giroux. I am a faculty member in the Geography and Geosciences Department at the University of Vermont and the Vermont State Climatologist. And it is my pleasure to kind of whip through some of these slides here because I know we're on a little bit of a tight timeline with lunch coming up. I was asked to share a little bit on my understanding of climate change and forests in the state of Vermont. And so it's going to be a high level picture in terms of that and not having the time to kind of drill down deeply into a lot of the things that are of particular interest to this committee as well as other cognate committees. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the things that are critically important to our forests in the state from a climate and climatology weather perspective, kind of focusing on some of the things that are both atmospheric, but are also temperature and water related, and then close out with some suggestions for some next steps. So as we're thinking about that, just setting the stage broadly speaking for what hazards are particularly of germane to Vermont forests, and particularly things like temperature extremes, moisture extremes, forest fires, pollution, all of those things are important to us. And they're all sort of working at the same time as things like pests and diseases affecting our forests. So just kind of getting that frame in there. And then specifically, there are some both timelines, some seasons where things are more important than others. There's some hazards that are more important than others. And so things like frost, particularly in this particular time of the year, we're getting into mud season. We're not out of the woods yet in terms of freeze and thaw cycles. And so there's certain species that are particularly susceptible to these successive types of stressors, right? And so things like our Christmas tree farms, balsam fir, red spruce, red pine, and so on, keeping an eye on some of those parts in here. And if you remember, this winter has been kind of like an interesting winter, right? Where we had a lot of freeze thaw cycles, and those set up certain types of stressors on some species. I'm driving down on I-89, I'm seeing a lot of the red pine showing those brown needles. And it's not just in Vermont. I was at UMass Amherst last week and driving up, it's all the way up from Mass, all the way up through to the Champlain Valley. So we're looking at that and kind of keeping in mind that even though our climate is changing, even though things are warming, we still have that freeze and thaw. So we still need to kind of keep an eye on the cold side of the equation as well. So just as a way of making sure we've got all of these, because I know the slides are going to be available afterwards, just making sure we have all of the pieces in mind as to what affects our forests and why do we need to care. So it's not just the forest and the standing biomass itself, it's also things like your soils, your vegetation. I love coming to the State House because I get that 3D look around and how all of the various parts of the landscape actually affect the health of the trees and species around us in here. So thinking about some of those pieces and thinking about the fact that winter is different from spring, is different from summer, is different from fall in terms of what's important to our forest and the health of our forest. So just very, very quickly thinking about our changing climate and what some of that might look like. This goes back to the 4th National Climate Assessment because I was privileged enough to kind of lead the chapter for the Northeast. And one of the big takeaways is that our seasons are changing, which means it's not just a temperature, it's not just a moisture, it's also the livelihoods that depend on all the parts of the environment that we care about, that our society is built around, right? So as those change, we're looking at how folks' livelihoods are going to change as well. So that's one piece that's important for us. And this is a diagram that is in the Climate Action Plan. So the Climate and Climate Change chapter in the Climate Action Plan talks about all of the various aspects of climate change as it relates to Vermont. And this diagram was created by my colleague, Dr. Jason Schaefer. And what he's trying to do here is to see how these different hazards are going to change and how likely they are and how confident we are in terms of some of these changes. So if we think about forest in particular, we're going to be looking at things like, wet snow, right? At the wrong time of the year causes a lot of breakage. Talk a little bit about droughts. We'll talk about wind because wind causes a lot of damage as well. And we'll also talk about, again, those extremes from temperature going from cold to hot, right? So these are some of the things that we were thinking will change. So the more you go that way for you folks, right? The more you go that way, the more likely they're going to change. And our confidence increases as we go up this way. So anything in that upper right corner, so upper right corner for you is something that's really, really likely to change. We're really confident that that's going to change, right? So those are some of those things that we just want to kind of keep in mind here. So when we think about forests, just like when we think about crops, we're looking to see how the growing season can change and how it's projected to change. So as you're looking at this, you see my cursor, by the way, right? As you're looking at this, the gray parts are what we've observed already, and then the reds and the blues are what we project out to the future, right? And so anything that's projected out to the future, the growing season is going to continue to increase. And we actually have data that shows that already. So this is some of the observations from the Proctor Maple Research Center in Underhill, where a lot of the work on your sugar maples is actually showing that increase over time of the length of the growing season and when the buds are starting to break early and so on and so forth. So that's one piece that's important from a forest perspective, that you're looking at that lengthening of your season. Now, length is one thing. You got to have the water to actually benefit from that lengthening season. So as we're looking at it, that's one of the reasons why we talk about floods and droughts as well, because all of those are kind of wrapped in here. So let's talk about some of these seasons. I'm going to start off with winter and spring, because winter is the season that's actually changing the most. And this year is a great example of that because we had both freeze and thaw cycles. We had everything from freezing rain and snow and rain and everything else in between. And it's like you can't catch a break because there's pretty much every single season in the winter that we just had, right? And so we're looking at how those seasons are changing because it wasn't that long ago that our winter was actually the warmest since 1895. So you got that big fluctuation back and forth, and that's putting stress on our forests, putting stress on their health. And because we had a freeze thaw cycle so much this year, I'm going to use this lower diagram here to bring in what I would usually talk about from a human perspective. So if you can think about that middle line here as kind of like the freezing mark, and time you go above that in the winter, you're getting thaws. And every time you go below that in the winter, you're getting freezes. If that goes on a lot and it's really, really pronounced, that puts particular stress on certain species like your oaks and your red pine and your red spruce, right? And so that's what we're seeing this year. And it's something, again, for us to kind of put not too far at the back of our mind, but to kind of keep an eye out because, again, we're looking at the health of our species and what species are susceptible to what, right? So that's one thing that we're looking at. This you've seen again this year, right? So whenever I give testimony, whenever I give a talk, I always ask people to send me more pictures so I can actually like flesh this out in what other places around the state, what other species are being affected by the snow that we're getting. It snowed twice earlier this week, right? And so what does that mean for plants that have already started to photosynthesize and transpire and so on? Because again, it puts stress on your various species. So that's one thing. Now, let's talk a little bit about some of the actual elements of the land, the atmosphere, the water that are important to us. And one of it is air quality. And you're probably thinking, air quality, forest, how is that kind of fitting together? And part of it is because our geography is so unique and so particular that, you know, because we have all these mountains and valleys and they all pretty much run north-south like this, if you get stagnation events, or if you get pollution kind of sitting in the valleys, that sets up a different kind of response for your trees than if you were like a more flat state, if that makes sense, right? And so we're looking at the role of topography in here and going back a few years when we had all that wildfire smoke coming down from parts of southern Canada, think about if we didn't have those mountains and valleys, all of that would have been a little bit more even in terms of how that wildfire smoke actually kind of moved out. The other reason why we're talking about air quality is because there's a gas that we breathe in, which affects us as humans, but it also affects forests and plant species, and it's ozone. Okay, so when you have ozone at the levels that we're walking around at, it's going to affect our plants. And so what you're seeing on the left-hand side here, that picture is what ozone injury does to one particular species. Okay, so again, air quality, something you would always think about, but it's critically important when we look at like germination, ongoing health, and so on, how that kind of plays out for us. So Department of Forest, Parks and Rec have some monitoring stations across the state. There are only 2 of them, but it shows a very nice decline in that winter injury, in that ozone injury over time, starting off in the mid-90s and going to about 2013. So less ozone, less injury, less stress, that's a good thing, right? And so the only way that we know that is by continuing to monitor and look at how these are changing over time. All right. Let me know if I'm going too quickly. Are we good?
It's pretty fast, but
It's pretty fast. I know it's the fire hose route, which is why, you know, having the slides after would be great for you to kind of tease apart and you know, take a look at, oh, I missed that. And so we can go back and take a look at these. So winds are another big thing that are important in the state, especially for our forest. And the different types of wind damage that you probably see, if you've got winds that are coming down the mountain, have you heard about Shropshires? That's a typical Vermont term, Shropshires, those mountain winds are coming straight on down, producing a lot of damage. And we see that on certain sides of the greens in particular. And so we're looking at what that means. We had a tornado last week. Did you hear about that? Right? We had a tornado last week. And so when the folks at the National Weather Service go out and look for tornadic damage in our forest, what they're going to look for is damage that looks, you know, kind of like a tornado went through, like so circular damage in here. All right. And every once in a while, when we get really strong thunderstorms or strong fronts moving through, we'll get winds that are fast enough that they're almost like hurricane level winds. And those are going to be very dangerous because they chop off the tops of your trees. Okay, so winds are important for us to also think about in looking at the health of our trees in here. So the next one is wildland fire. And this is one that is becoming more and more of concern that we need to really pay attention to, because wildland fires are becoming something that we need to actually quantify and look and see what's taking place. So there are 2 seasons of the year when wildland fires are particularly important. Right now in the spring and then in the fall. But we also have wildland fires that can occur in the summertime, particularly if it's dry enough, right? So we're looking at what that means for us, because today, the 23rd of April, the National Weather Service put out an alert saying we might want to make sure we're not doing any burning today because it is so dry out there. The air is so dry, we need to kind of pay attention, right? So you know, you're looking outside, you've got some nice green foliage out there, but it's a day to kind of be on the alert, right? Because if it continues like that, they might have to put out what's called a red flag day. And that red flag day, which tells you there's no burning at all, we actually did one of those last year in the middle of the drought. And there was like a complete ban on burning because of how dry it was. Like the ground was dry, the soils were dry, the vegetation was dry. So there was a ban on all burning in the middle of October. So that's something that we're looking at and keeping an eye on. So I've been teasing you, because I've been talking about floods, talking about droughts, and kind of skirting around it. So let's see why this is important for us to take a look at. So Vermont, yes, is a wet state. Yes, there's a lot of flooding that goes on. You see that storm system that's moving up behind my head like this. Okay, so there's a lot of moisture coming in, and this was actually the floods of July of 2023. Okay, and I'm letting it play a number of times because on the left-hand side here, as it plays, what you'll see is some wildland fire smoke at the same time. See that? As all of the floods were going on. So we have a challenge in trying to make sure that we are keeping an eye on all of the things that are being stressed. So even as we're cleaning out from the floods, we're still breathing in that wildland fire smoke. So that's important for us to kind of keep in mind moving forward in here. Now, the other thing about too much moisture is that Tropical Storm Irene showed us really, really clearly that when you have like 7 or 8 inches coming in and being received in a very short period of time, and it overloads the soils, the trees actually tip up like that, or they blow down because the ground is so wet. So you saw a lot of those entire bowls coming up. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? You've seen those in the forest, right? You see a lot of those because there was too much moisture. Okay. Now, that's one side of the equation. The other side of the equation is drought. And so droughts are critically important because they affect species in different ways. So you're looking at some maples behind me here, and you're seeing the edges. You see how they're brown, right? That's a typical signal that we're in a drought that's severe enough for the trees to start to kind of condense the area that they are losing water from in an effort to survive. And so whenever you see this, particularly in your maples, whether it's your sugar maples or your Norway maples, it's a tree trying to preserve itself, right? And so knowing about droughts is important in here. So the drought that we saw that really, really ramped up last fall started in 2024, and it's going on still today, right? So we are still coming out of the drought, particularly along the eastern side of the state and the southern part of the state. So again, it's one of the reasons why we're talking about droughts in here. And so my thanks to Josh Hallman, who provided this map that shows some aerial surveys of where those really stressed species were as they flew across the state itself. And you see Rutland County and Addison County in here, which kind of goes along with the severe stress that they had from an agricultural perspective, right? And so it's all of our vegetation together that we're looking at in here. So that drought that it peaked last year continues on right now. What you're seeing here is the severity of it. So the darker the orange and the red, the more severe it is. And what you're seeing is how severe that one was that we saw back in 2024, right? So the question is, have we seen this in the past? Can we learn from what happened in the past? And the answer is yes, because here are all of the droughts that go back to 1895 to 2025. And all of those brown regions are places where we had drought. All of the blues in here are when it was wet. So we've had droughts in the past. And so we need to learn from those droughts that we've seen before. What does it mean for us and our species and the health of us? All right. So this is probably too small to read. So I'm going to leave that for you to kind of parse through when you go back through the slides, because what it's showing you is when do we need to think about Christmas tree farms? When do we need to think about honeybees and the ability to continue to pollinate, right? Because each one of these is important at the various levels that you're looking at in terms of drought. So this is how bad it got last year, right? And as you're looking at this in here, that red tells you that we were almost the second highest in terms of drought, and the entire state was in drought. So again, one of the reasons why we're paying attention. Now, if you go out today, if you go out last week, if you go out next week, you will see the impacts of the drought that we had in a bunch of different species. And again, this is thanks to Josh for sending me these pictures, because you're looking at spruce, you're looking at different types of saplings across here, and you're seeing the stress in terms of the conditions today, right? So this is going to set us up for the health moving into the rest of this year and moving forward. Now, in Vermont, we can get drought going on at the same time as disease and insect infestations. And so thinking about all of those pieces in here as to why there's so many stressors on our forest at the same time or one after the next in here. So wrapping up here, and you're like, everybody's breathing a sigh of relief. Wrapping up here, what are some of the implications of knowing about how climate change affects our forest? And part of it is, as we're looking at temperatures and humidity and moisture effects on soils, we also have a couple other things to pay attention to. So deposition, acid rain deposition, whether our trees are actually changing as we speak. So changing the bud break, changing other signs of phenology, and thinking about how can we capture that so that we can project out into the future. So I'm very happy that we are having this conversation today on the 23rd of April, because yesterday there was a Forest Climate Indicators webinar where they released and made a demonstration of tools to help us look at forests. That's like less than 24 hours old, right? And so it helps us to look at different diseases, different stresses, and so on. And so I'm gonna have to be parsing through this to be able to really see the power of this, and to maybe put it on my website, my state climatologist website, so that everybody would be able to kind of benefit from that. So as we move forward and we think about other additional pieces to keep in mind, stewardship of our forests is really important. We also need to include and uplift and elevate Indigenous ways of knowing and access to our forest. Thinking about the right mixture between working lands and natural forests, thinking about all of the co-benefits that could occur by having really healthy forests in here as we step through and look at it from different parts of the state with our different geography, our different topographies, and knowing that our land use has gotten us to this point in some instances, and how that could be important for us kind of moving forward. So with that, I'm going to leave a lot of these hard copy and electronic resources with Kat so that you can upload those, make them available to the committee and everybody else who might need them, including the climate and climate change section in the climate action plan, which really gets into that cold and other pieces that are important. And then the state summary for Vermont itself. So with that, thank you for the ability to be here in person at the State House and provide the testimony, particularly around forests. and I'm happy to take any questions that might be on the table.
Thank you so much for your presentation. What is the name of your webpage?
So it's the Office of the Vermont State Climatologist. It's currently down and it's being rebuilt by Northeast Regional Climate Center, the same folks who just released that forest website yesterday. So it's a very nice dovetailing. Hopefully we'll be online in a few months' time.
That's a USDA, it said, program?
So the Northeast Regional Climate Center is a NOAA affiliate,
We're still,
but they did it in conjunction with the climate hubs at the USDA,
they're still operational and functioning.
as far as I know.
Do members have questions? Representative Austin, do you want to let the committee know about the resolution?
Sure, this basically started, and this is part of my floor introduction, but I met Dr. Drew, when I was first, placed on the Colchester Planning Commission, which was probably 10 or 11, 12 years ago, and I had called to get some information, again, another forecast about climate, because we were creating our town plan. And I wanted to, just have some foresight about what was coming our way. So anyway, she was just awarded, a very prestigious, I just want to pronounce it right. Can you, yeah,
So it's the American Association for the Advancement of Science, Manny L. Baumick Award for Public Engagement with Science. It's a longer title than my name, so.
so it's like the Pulitzer Prize of Science internationally and nationally. It's a very competitive award, and Dr. Jewell was just awarded that. And so I have a resolution that will be read on the floor and she will be recognized. But she didn't know this, but meanwhile, I have her going to the climate caucus. I figure having her come here, so I tried to just see how we could utilize her expertise, in different places. So I appreciate, I know you had to probably put this presentation together quickly. I appreciate it. I think we all appreciate it and the work you do.
Well, thank you. Thank you for those very kind and gracious words. This is what I live for, because it forces me out of my comfort zone to learn a little bit more, particularly since some of this is like I said, a few hours old. So it forces me to actually kind of stay on top of things and really be able to explain that and bring that to whoever needs it. So thank you for recognizing that.
And thank you for joining us this morning, and
Thank you.
see you on the floor.
Yes, we'll see you on the floor.
We're adjourned until this afternoon when we are with Michael O'Grady. Just as soon as you can